Newsom is blaming the White House for an immigration sweep in Ventura County that led to a violent clash with protesters. Federal agents say they found hundreds of migrants, including 8 unaccompanied minors, working at a cannabis farm. More demonstrators showed up as word of the raid got out. Things got heated and some protesters threw rocks at officers. The National Guard was called in to control the crowd. At one point, tear gas was fired at protesters. At least 4 people were taken to the hospital for treatment. Another confrontation between federal agents and demonstrators erupted at a separate cannabis farm about 30 miles away in Santa Barbara County. The facility is owned by the same parent company. A congressman representing the area says he was blocked by agents as he tried to gain access to the farm during the raid.
This is overkill. It's political theater by the Trump administration. It's ridiculous. It's deplorable. And again, they're not going after criminals. They say they are, but this is a clear example that they're not.
DHS confirmed to KTVU the marijuana farm at the center of the raid is now under investigation for child labor violations. This could lead to charges of human trafficking or smuggling. Let's get some insight on how immigration enforcement is affecting California's agriculture industry by turning to Patricia Ortiz, directing attorney at the California Rural Legal Assistance. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes.
In this case, there were undocumented children working in the fields. How does that add to the complexity of this case?
I think this administration has been using undocumented children as an excuse to engage in enforcement actions. That's not to say that there isn't labor violations going on. So it makes it very complex because it's hard to understand whether this is a legitimate action or whether this is just another step in the enforcement, increased enforcement that we've seen in the last year. So it really makes it difficult for the community to feel, even if this were a legitimate action, its prior actions have eroded the trust in ICE and HSI and other immigration agencies in having the best interest of children and unaccompanied minors in mind.
We should note that here in California, children as young as 12 can work in agriculture. There are some restrictions. We should note that this raid happened at a marijuana farm. Did the fact, did what was being grown perhaps also spark the attention of the feds?
It's possible. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of complexity around marijuana and cannabis and just that intersection of state law versus federal law. So it definitely could have been a factor as to why this particular industry was targeted.
I mean, I know certainly, you mentioned complexity. Clearly, from the federal standpoint, growing marijuana is illegal nationwide and here in our state, despite what California law says. What do you say to people who might say, that's the only work I could find?
We generally advise our immigrant clients to avoid the cannabis industry because it can have very negative consequences on their immigration case or any possibilities of obtaining immigration relief. So our advice is usually to try to avoid that. Unfortunately, people don't necessarily understand this complexity. If it's legal in California, they're seeing that there's businesses selling cannabis, then it's difficult for them to understand, unless they speak to an attorney necessarily, that this is actually something that's still illegal with federal law.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on the confusing messaging for sure. Things got heated down there in Ventura County. It's a scene we've seen before. What do you say to people who want to support immigrants who gather at the scene of such raids? In this case, we saw tear gas being fired. Some protesters threw rocks at the federal agents.
I would say, generally, as an attorney, I can't advise people to engage in unlawful actions, but keeping an eye on what is going on and documenting and making sure that there is documentation and filming is very important because it lets us know really, are rights being violated? Is the way that they're going about it correct? Is there potentially, as we've seen in other jurisdiction, a lawsuit down the line if they aren't engaging, in these enforcement actions constitutionally? So I do think having presence and having, someone there to document what's happening is very important.
So observe, document, but don't engage. Finally, we know that these sweeps are having a chilling impact on the agriculture industry. What is your hope when it comes to these companies being held accountable?
Well, I think one of the difficulties that we're seeing here at our organization is we are seeing a really chilling effect on people bringing claims against their employers, very legitimate claims. So it's hard to say that this action is actually going to help because, to the contrary, it seems to be just inhibiting people from bringing forth their cases out of fear that there might be retaliation, that they might be, encounter immigration enforcement action. So it's a little counterintuitive as to what they're doing and what's actually the effect that it's actually having on the community.
So the Department of Homeland Security confirmed to us here that the marijuana farm at the center of this story is under investigation for child labor violations. They say this could lead to charges of human trafficking or smuggling. Would you support that action?
I think, our organization always is in favor of making sure that labor rights are being supported. It's hard to say without knowing what's the facts of the case and what's going on, whether or not there is actual labor violations or trafficking involved. We have to wait and see what the investigation finds.
All right, it is early. All right, Attorney Patricia Ortiz at the California Rural Legal Assistance Group, thank you again for your time and your expertise.
Thank you.
Thanks.